everyone, I'm Ian McCarthy of Lifting for Life, and tonight I'm bringing you another installment of the Lifting for Life Q&A series. And tonight's question comes from Ruby Cherie, probably mispronouncing her last name, sorry, who asks, in a deficit, so she posts a graph of her body weight over the past month or so, and her body weight dropped from just above, the units aren't exact here, but above 52 kilos down to below 50 and then back up to 51.6-ish. And the question is, in a deficit, what could cause this maintained high? Now, the immediate answer which someone articulated to her is, you aren't in a deficit. And I first want to state for the record that I do think most weight gain and weight loss is the result of changes in energy balance. And I think the longer the period, so the greater the period of time in which this occurs consistently, the more likely it's a function of energy balance. And the greater the degree, the more likely it's a result of changes in energy balance. So to give an example of something which I would not immediately think to say, okay, this is energy balance related, small fluctuations from day to day, because of the scale and meaning the degree to which weight changes and the fact that it isn't consistent over a long period, we would say, okay, this is a fluctuation resulting from day-to-day variations in hydration status, food in the gut, etc. Which brings me to the next point, which is I do think it's important that we recognize all of the components, or the fact that many components result in one's body weight. So I want to say most people, but perhaps maybe not most people if we just look at the whole population. But increasingly people are becoming aware of the fact that body weight isn't just a function of fat mass. It isn't you lost 5 pounds, therefore you lost 5 pounds of fat. And this is something which I think popular weight loss approaches haven't traditionally properly accounted for. And they probably still don't, but it's something that people, again, are becoming increasingly aware of. So the next account of it would be, okay, well, you have fat and muscle, but that still doesn't cut it. What we actually have is body fat, skeletal muscle, you have smooth muscle, so that's muscle present in the small intestine as an example. You have the weight of your skeleton. You have the weight of food that in various stages of digestion. You have changes in body weight resulting from changes in hydration, so presence of body water in different tissues. Even things like your hair. Strangely, like this really speaks to the way I think, but it struck me that, particularly in the case of someone with long hair, if they were, let's say you had a woman with really long hair and she were to get it all cut off, that would actually have a significant effect on her weight. And it would be and that's I realize that's a completely weird example, but it still illustrates the point that you don't want to think, okay, so someone's body weight changes by whatever. This is necessarily indicative of a change in energy balance. So again, it's one thing, and I think it's reasonable to say that, okay, generally we're talking about changes in energy balance, but we need to be aware of the nuance. Now, this has been mostly fundamental, quote, theoretical stuff, not talking about application. So one of the issues which arises in practice when people cut, not every time, but with enough frequency that it's something that needs to be talked about, is people retain water because of stress. So, and there's a whole discussion to be had of the stress unavoidably induced by the diet, and then the stress which results from how someone responds to the unavoidable stressors of the diet, which quickly gets outside the scope of this discussion. But the point is, people will retain water because they're stressed out, and this can, mask actual changes in body fat and or muscle mass. So you can have someone who is losing fat, so they are actually, let's say their muscle mass is being exactly maintained, which isn't going to happen, but in the sense of it being exactly the same over time. But muscle mass maintained, they're losing body fat, but they are highly water retentive because they're extremely stressed out. This could mask that water retention could make it look like the person isn't in an energy deficit, even though they are, because they're retaining water which has no energy value. You know, if you gain 10 pounds of water, because water has no energy value, the metabolizable energy of your body remains the same. So again, someone might falsely conclude, you might see weight maintenance or weight gain when the person is actually in an energy deficit. And the risk there is for someone to then say, okay, I'm not in a deficit, so I need to be more aggressive, which can then further increase the stress which is causing the water retention in the first place. So that is closer in the direction of what someone should actually do in this situation. Now, to speak to Ruby directly, and hopefully this will benefit others in similar situations, I'm not sure whether or not you were previously aware of everything I just said, but now that you are, or now that you definitely are, you want to look at everything which has been going on and use your own best judgment as to what has changed. Now, something I haven't mentioned, which relates to body water, is the menstrual cycle and the way in which women gain weight going into the period and the period, their period, and retain water throughout. And interestingly, that varies very significantly between individuals. For some people, it's almost not noticeable, and then for others, it's very severe, and most people probably land in the middle, both in terms of symptoms generally and the weight gain aspect. And that's something, again, not necessarily relating to energy balance. So that's something that you as an individual are going to be, you'll have a better sense of that than I will as the guy on the outside looking in, answering a question in a YouTube video, but that's something that you definitely have to be aware of, because if what we're actually looking at here is this is what your body weight does through your menstrual cycle, it would be problematic for us to conclude, you really have to change your diet. Similarly, you mentioned it could be stress-related, and I would agree that that's definitely plausible. If it's stress-related, then going back to my previous point, the answer wouldn't be to be more aggressive in your diet. And it's tough to give specific recommendations because I don't know the overarching context, but it might be that your diet's actually completely appropriate and what you need to do isn't related. You might need to sleep more. You might need to meditate. You might need to do other things that you find to be helpful in reducing stress. It might be that something I want to mention, like it's important that we recognize this. It could be that you actually aren't in a deficit. Could be that you were, and you're doing things the same way dietarily, and for that reason you think you're still in a deficit, but you aren't because something else changed, which you haven't identified. So I think this is a good example of where, without me knowing more about the situation, my recommendation is going to be take a step back and scrutinize everything. And I don't want to frame this from a negative perspective, but the goal here is to find things that you've been doing wrong. And then, it's interesting I'm discussing this, as earlier today I watched the latest 3DMJ podcast, and Eric Helms spoke at length, and one of the things he mentioned was not wanting to change everything at once because we want to be cognizant of the influence of confounding variables. So if you were to change 4 things that you're doing and you get a positive result, you can't reasonably conclude that any one of those things is responsible. With that said, and I agree with that generally, I agree that in practice you generally don't want to change everything at once. This is a situation where, unless this is, again, something relating to your menstrual cycle, it could be a situation where there are multiple things that need to be addressed. And my suggestion, my intuition is that the way to go would be to change everything which you find is problematic, as opposed to drawing it out. Because if you were to find, let's say that you find in this period, someone mentioned reduced need to non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So calories that you're burning not through basal metabolism, not through exercise. It could be that there's been a significant shift there that you've not identified. That could be true while you're undersleeping, while you're stressed out because of other things. And my suggestion would be everything that you can identify that you can change it simultaneously, and then try to tease out individual. Is the lighting better with my computer darker? Maybe. Try to tease out individual, the degree of influence of individual aspects with time. So I think that's where I'll leave it. So thank you so much for your time. I don't know why the phrase ladies and gentlemen came to mind, but thanks again. I hope you found value in the video. If you did, please do hit the like button below. Feel free to comment below, and I will see you again soon. Peace out, bye.